When you attend a job interview, one of the most important things to focus on are job interview questions. Now, not only including the questions you're going to ask the employer, but what questions the employer may ask you. And there are some typical job interview questions that many companies ask. So in this video, we want to look at some typical interview questions and some ways that you can successfully answer them. Now, inevitably, this is going to be one of the first things an employer asks because, after all, that's what you're at interview for. They've got a problem in their company, they've got a vacancy they need filling, and they want to know why you're the right candidate for it. So the most important thing to think here is that there probably is a lot of competition for the role. There could be lots of other candidates that have applied with similar experience and similar qualifications to you. So in order to answer this question successfully, you need to think about what makes you different from everybody else. And one of the best ways to do this is to do your research before you go to interview. So go on the company website, really familiarise yourself with their business, their core business model, their business development plans, what departments they have, what kind of people they have working there. So really get to know the company well. Then you can look at your own CV and experience and look back at past roles you've done and tie that in with the company and what they want to achieve moving forward. So when you answer, why should we hire you, you're able to then really personalise your own experience to the job role and show the employer the kind of impact you could have on their company. This is a typical question. An employer usually wants to know what you consider to be your biggest strength. But the best way you can answer this question is by tying it in with the company, the role and the responsibilities and making it relevant. So for instance, if you're applying for a customer service role, perhaps you want to draw on your strengths at rapport building or the fact that you can really work well on business development, that you've got good relationship with some of your clients. So that's going to be a real responsibility of the role. So that is important to highlight. But if it's a sales-driven role, then perhaps you want to draw on your strengths in sales. So whether that's sales figures or targets that you've hit in the past. So really just make sure it's relevant to the job role. Now this is a typical question and there's a typical answer to it. Many candidates end up saying that their biggest weakness is that they're a bit of a perfectionist, and lots of employers come to expect this at interview. So I think you probably want to be a little bit different to that. The biggest thing to think about is whether that weakness can be spun into a positive. So for example, perhaps you want to say that you're a bit too concise, which means that you spend a lot of time on projects and sometimes work late. Those things aren't necessarily a bad thing, but they are a weakness and can be worked on. So make sure you hone in on something that can be turned into a positive, and make sure you let the employer know that you're working on that weakness and that you think you can develop on it in this job role. And this is a tough one to answer because you don't want to be too overambitious, but you also don't want to show that you're not ambitious. So the best thing to do in this position is to make sure you're keeping it relevant with the company's career aspirations. So if you're applying to work in a particular industry and you say you want to work in a completely different industry in a few years' time, the employer is going to be quite confused as to where you're going to fit in with their company in the future. Similarly, if there is a particular ceiling at this organisation and you say you want to be a director in a year's time, again, that's a little bit unrealistic. So keep your goals realistic, show you're ambitious, but most importantly, show that you want longevity at the company and you see yourself growing there. This links back to the first question, but really what you need to think about is I guess think outside the box. Don't just think about your qualifications and your experience that make you right for the role. Think about things you do outside of work. So it might be that you've worked in a voluntary position, that you've worked for a charity, that you've completed an internship, that you have a particular hobby that can impact on your industry. Really think outside the box and think about what makes you different, not just about your key skills, but what other extra things you can bring to the company to make sure that you stand out from your competition.